Good morning.
Good morning.
Okay, so today what we're going to do is move into actually coming kind of to the conclusion of this series. I don't know if you realize that or not, but we will be concluding the series right after Easter, which kind of dovetails into the mystagogy period for our neophytes. Next Sunday, Deacon Basco will be here with you to do Guardian Angels, which is his long-awaited talk that was supposed to be a while back. We had to move the schedule around, so he'll be here next week to do that. Today what I'm going to do is cover something that I actually found far more fascinating than I expected to. And part of the reason I found it very interesting, more interesting than I thought, I mean, of course, I put it on the schedule that I was going to talk about saints and their encounters with angels, knowing that there are many saints throughout history that have had these direct encounters, yeah? And then I didn't realize how rich this was and how much I had to drill down and narrow it down to specific sort of different experiences to get some diversity in there because the story of the saints is replete with examples of encounters with angels. So I'm really sort of fascinated by that aspect of it and was more fascinated to learn, and actually it's why I put it on the opening slide, was more fascinated to learn that angels don't always have to be people. They don't have to appear in human form. Did you know this? How many of you have ever heard the story of St. John Bosco and the gray one? Grigio, right? The gray dog. And I lost almost an entire day reading about this. I don't think I had ever heard the story, or if I had, I'd never heard it expressed quite this way. And so I had to go into the catechism. I had to go into, I was reading Catholic Answers blogs. I was reading all of these theologians, Peter Kreeft, people like that I know and respect, trying to find out how can an angel really appear as a dog? What do you think?
Yes.
Why can they?
Is their Holy Spirit?
They're pure spirit. They're pure spirit. And so there's a really interesting story here about John Bosco, St. John Bosco, and the gray dog. So I'm not leading with that, but it is my lead slide because now I'm kind of in love with the story. But anyway, so what I want to do today is to invite you kind of into a deeper space that is, it seems like it's really familiar to us. As I said, I thought I knew a lot about this, and yet in many ways, I think you're going to find it remains profoundly mysterious to us, even as we unpack these different kind of experiences. Exploring the relationship between angels and the saints begs some really important questions, especially when you see, as I said, the diversity of the experiences, how these things seem to manifest themselves. Angels are no longer this abstract theological category, right? But they become these very lived realities in the lives of these people. So encounters that have been meticulously recorded, documented, interpreted across centuries, some of them. Obviously, in the case of at least a couple of these, depicted very famously in well-known art, even beginning in the Middle Ages. And so it kind of, I think, we have to begin with what might seem an unsettling premise, maybe that's just me, we'll see. If angels are real, and of course our Catholic tradition insists that they are, it's part of our teaching, then why do they appear so unevenly in our human experience? This is a question that I've thought about a little bit. Why do some saints report these vivid, even physical, direct encounters, something as dramatic as this, for instance, while most believers, all of us probably in this room, or most of us in this room, move through our lives without anything that could be described like this? You ever thought about this? Why them and not me? Why would they have that experience and not me? Or how cool? Why couldn't God send me a dog? You know? And I was thinking about this, with some of you know that I have a cat who's, anyway.
Maybe a manifestation of a demon.
Exactly. She acts like, she goes up the stairs like I'm a beneficiary in her life insurance policy. She's a beneficiary in my life insurance policy. But I was thinking about that, looking at her the other day, thinking, well, if angels can take form of an animal, we might have a question about where you came from. But I do think that there's this really cool story involved in this, and so perhaps maybe even a bigger question than that is, why does it happen to other people throughout history and not most of us? Are they literal encounters? The things we're going to talk about, are they literal encounters with spiritual beings? And how can we know that from the record? Are they some sort of interior, sort of psychological process that this saint had that's expressed in symbolic language? I thought, well, maybe that's it. Maybe that's what it is. It's not an actual encounter. Or are these stories that kind of began out of a reputation of a saint and then to sort of take on a life of their own? For instance, the story of St. Francis of Assisi that we're going to talk about, the encounter that he had with a seraph. I mean, the highest ranking angel. And then I got to thinking, well, is it some sort of commentary on you if you have an encounter with a lower ranking angel, right? So all these questions came to mind. All that is to say, I lost a lot of time for you guys, so you're welcome. And this is where I kind of want to guide us today. I think we're dealing with a topic that really sort of resists being reduced to one little category or one question, or any of those questions. Maybe it's all of them. So my thesis today is kind of this, that the encounters that saints have had with angels are not peripheral to our faith. They're not ornamental. They're not made up stories. They are revelatory. They're revelatory in a private way for those people, but also then carries the benefit for us. The fact that we're going to spend, 45 minutes or so this morning talking about this tells us that these stories still have an impact on our Catholic faith. And I also think they sort of show this visible and invisible, touching upon that theme again. They show us that something about the structure of that reality itself, that the visible and the invisible realms, as we've talked about them from the very beginning, are not separate. They're not separate, but they're permeable. We don't necessarily see how much so, because we are physical and they are not. But the lives of the saints, I think, reveal a lot to us about how thin that barrier is, okay? So remember that, let's review real quickly. Angels are pure spirit. What else?
Intellect.
Pure intellect. What else?
They serve only God.
They serve only God, right? Anything else that you remember?
They're messengers.
They can be messengers, good.
They have different choirs or different levels.
Different choirs, different levels. Okay, good. See, I'm feeling validated now that you're remembering as we draw close to the final exam period, that you remember some of these things. Yes, so they're pure intellect, pure spirit. Remember that they are eternal. They're eternal beings. They were created at the time of creation itself as light. They are messengers, but they are also protectors. They also apparently intervene in human affairs when they are directed to, even intervening on the behalf of nations when they are directed to. So we've sort of seen all of that richness of that. Beings without material bodies, and I think that's what dovetails into what we're going to talk about today. Not bound in the space that we are, not bound in the physical reality, but they are capable of acting anywhere within the created universe at God's command and at God's will. So they don't move from place to place as we do, I don't think, but they act where they are willed to act. Okay, so when a saint sees an angel, we have to ask, I think, what does seeing mean when the being in question is not a physical being?
They manifest themselves.
Okay, so you're going to hear some different descriptions of this. They do three primary things, and this is kind of the big takeaway. If you looked at least the ones that I began with, I actually narrowed down to just maybe 5 or so, to get some diversity. There's really sort of 3 themes out of that at least for me, sort of came to the surface. They're either in a saint's life to illuminate, in other words, they communicate some kind of knowledge, okay? They're in a saint's life to protect, which is the case with Grigio, okay? They're in a saint's life to protect, so they act in accordance with some divine providence to protect a person or persons, or they mediate, okay? Not in the sense that, Jesus is our only mediator, so don't confuse this. Not as intermediaries replacing God, but as participants, sort of in the ordering of creation between humanity and God. We talked about those 9 choirs of angels, so we know that not all angels are the same. They have different function, they have different mission. So, when the saints encounter angels, this is the other thing you're going to see. When they encounter angels, they're not encountering some generic broad category. Oh, I had an encounter with an angel. They are encountering a being with a specific type of mission or a specific type of function. So we're going to begin by looking actually at Padre Pio, Saint Padre Pio, a modern figure. I thought we'd begin here. Padre Pio spoke about his guardian angel, and I'm not taking too much away from Deacon for next week. Deacon, feel free to use this too, because Padre Pio is one of the saints who speaks the most about his relationship with his guardian angel, not as this kind of abstract thing, but as a real companion, a companion in his daily life. And he encouraged those who wrote to him, this is actually in his letters that have survived. He encouraged people in response, people who were in distress, who were writing to Padre Pio because he has this great reputation for intercessory prayer, even while he was alive. He writes to people and tells them to send their guardian angels with messages when they could not reach him physically. Okay, now can we just stop and put a pin in that right there and talk about that? Send your guardian angel as a messenger? Got any yellow warning lights here at all we might need to talk about? Well, yeah, I mean, you got to first have a relationship with your guardian angel. That's true. Yes, Austin.
Wouldn't that come off kind of like telepathy?
Well, okay, so there's a little bit of mysticism in here. Yes, that's true. Which we're Catholics. So what? Mysticism, it's weird. We love it. That's fine. That's a good point. But what about you directing your guardian angel to do something? Directing your guardian angel to do something. How do angels act? Only at the will of God. So, I suppose this is possible, right? If it is within God's will, that your angel carry out some task like that, then yes. But I think there's a little pitfall here. Although he wrote about it frequently, you can't get here, send your guardian angel. Your guardian angel will talk to my guardian angel. Okay? There's like this communication network that we are completely unaware of. Yeah. So pause for a moment and consider, again, what's actually being claimed there. It does seem to suggest some kind of networked communication. I said that as a joke, but doesn't it seem to suggest that?
Yeah. So you ask God if he could send your guardian angel for you.
I think that's a more proper orientation.
Yeah.
What was that comment?
To ask God to send your guardian angel, right? This relational structure that angels seem to maybe participate in the exchange of prayer, in the exchange of intentions, and even communication. And Padre Pio, to be clear, he did not describe this as symbolic in any way. He didn't put any qualifiers on it. He speaks of it as if it is real. Yeah, just send them. Okay? So how has this been interpreted? Skeptics, again, might say that this is either one, like as Austin pointed out, maybe this touches upon something that's a little bit too mystical. Or is it just something that's intended to comfort people who are writing to him? You know, is this just a way of responding to them in a way that would comfort them? But within the theological tradition, I think something else is happening. Padre Pio's experiences, if you read if you started reading the totality of his life and his experiences with his own guardian angel, which I know, Deacon, I'm probably going to leave all that for you next week because he's a great one to mind for this, okay, guardian angels. He tells us directly they are not isolated from you. They are not distant from you. They are right next to you. And that there is nothing that you do in your life that they are not there, and your guardian angel especially. So, in other words, he says, it is a living network. It is a living network. And the angels are part of that kind of movement in a very metaphysical way, in a supernatural way, going on that we're not even aware of. So, St. Padre Pio had a direct relationship with his own guardian angel and claims that they spoke daily. Okay? Now, we turn to St. Joan of Arc. St. Joan of Arc, perhaps one of the most scrutinized cases of angelic encounter in history because she was put on trial. Okay? So we have a very, very good record of what she reported as her interactions, especially with St. Michael, the archangel. Joan reported both while she was, actually, how many of you know the story of Joan of Arc, sort of her context? Does everybody kind of know?
Yeah.
Okay? That she shows up at the court of the exiled King Charles VII in France, claiming that God has sent her to relieve the siege, the English siege. Okay? So, in that context is where she reports to the King of France that she's had these direct messages from St. Michael the Archangel, along with St. Catherine and St. Margaret, I think are the other two. But St. Michael, I'm sure, raised a few eyebrows. And then, of course, again, at her trial, we have a whole other record of her testimony about her encounters with St. Michael. And she said that St. Michael didn't come to console her, he directed her mission. He directly directed her mission. And it is a mission that altered the course of French history and arguably altered the course of world history. I mean, it's one of those, sort of the end of the 100 Years' War is one of those periods, y'all forgive me, I'm a medievalist, but if you go back and you look at that period intensely, you could see how if things had gone a different way, our world would look nothing like it does today. I mean, entire sort of nations might be different. The whole global sort of experience we have today might look very, very different. So this is why I think her story is especially interesting. She claims that she had this direct contact with him. He directed her mission. He told her what to do. And at her trial, that became a central focus of the interrogation against her. Was this a divine encounter she had, they asked, or are you delusional? You know, there's an attempt to discredit her. And the judges pressed her relentlessly. I'm going to quote this from her trial transcript. How do you know these voices are from God and not the devil? And Joan's answer on the trial record is it's very few words, and it is strikingly simple. She answered, quote, I know him by his goodness. That was her defense. I know by the goodness. So from a modern perspective, you know, we might want to look back at that and say, I mean, had anybody in here ever had an encounter with St. Michael? Like a direct encounter? He's appeared to you? Let's get this on record right now. So it's a little hard, I think, for us to wrap our heads around this. We might, to the modern mind, we might want to try to interpret this with some sort of a neurological or psychological explanation. or some sort of myth making that was going on in the Middle Ages about her sanctity. But guys, she was not canonized a saint. She was executed in 1431 by being burned at the stake. Everybody know that? At 19 years of age. She was not canonized until 1909.
Wow.
So this is something, and this was not some myth making that was designed to promote her image as a popular medieval saint, even in that political environment. This was subjected to some pretty rigorous investigation of her life. And were these encounters actually authentic? So theologically, Joan's experience suggests that angels function as agents of direction to tell us what we need to do to achieve some higher good, or obviously according to God's plan. So in this case, they're not just messengers. Michael's not a messenger. Michael is a what? He's a defender. So he's the warrior. He's the warrior angel. So he is directing human action according to God's plan in history. And here's the tension. And I think this would be difficult for us. She obeyed the voice. Even when institutional authority doubted her, she obeyed it. And doesn't that raise a big question for us? What happens when divine communication might happen to disrupt some established structure or some established situation? How likely are you to listen to that voice? I mean, I'm asking this rhetorically for all of us, okay? Not just me. What would our first thought be? I'm imagining things. What would your first thought be about somebody who reported that to you?
He's crazy.
It's crazy. Thank you for your honesty, Carl. Yeah, exactly. But I think that's natural. That would be our first reaction is, okay. But I think she forces the story of her life, especially when you consider all the circumstances, if you understand her historically, then you begin to see that she forces us to confront, I think, the possibility that these things are more real more often than we think. Which raises questions about what? People who have mental illness, right? Doesn't it raise questions? It should raise questions about that. But here's the key thing. She said, I know him by his goodness. And that was her only defense. That was the moderating thing. The moderating question for her was, is this good? Is this good? Okay. St. Francis of Assisi. These are, as you can tell, these are in no particular order, by the way. Except I deliberately moved one to the end, but they're in no particular order. This is a different kind of encounter than the other two we've talked about. St. Padre Pio dealing with messages as communication network between divine. But all of our guardian angels are probably communicating right now. They might be having a rave somewhere. They're all right here with us and communicating. And then of course we have this very, very stunning encounter that is recorded between St. Joan of Arc and St. Michael the Archangel. That is a very different kind of revelatory experience. And now we move into a different kind of encounter with St. Francis of Assisi, who doesn't just hear or converse with an angel. Oh, no. That would be too simple. He experienced a vision of a seraphim, the highest order of angels, accompanied by his reception of the stigmata. When he received the gift, the mystical gift of the stigmata, which is well documented among his contemporaries and his companions. This is something that I don't think that we have any reason to doubt at all. So that's not just an encounter with an angel. That is for him a transformation in his life that is going to be very publicly seen, publicly shared, and edifying to many, 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 many people. Even today, if you read about St. Francis and his stigmata, it's very edifying to see what he suffered in a very public, sort of demonstrable way, to have all of the wounds of the stigmata, and probably contributed to the weakness that brought about an early death. Okay? Same with Padre Pio, of course. Padre Pio also had the stigmata, I should mention that, but he didn't receive his from a seraph. Okay? The seraph he describes as a six-winged radiant creature. That's how he describes it. Not a messenger in the ordinary sense. Remember that if you remember what we talked about, the hierarchy. Do you remember we talked about that? St. Thomas Aquinas and the 9 choirs of angels. The seraphs are the ones who are associated with this burning love. This burning kind of love. Proximity to God that is almost like would be unbearable for humanity, probably. And what happens to Francis as a result of this encounter? With this burning love, this highest form of an angel, is that he is physically marked. He's physically marked with all the wounds of Christ by that encounter. So that's a different kind of experience, isn't it? So this angel is not a messenger. This angel is not just delivering information. This angel is not giving him a direction. This angel is marking him physically for the entire world and all of human history to know. Participating actively in that with a human being. So Francis, his body becomes a walking revelation. A walking revelation. So we've talked about communication. This is transformation. Yeah? Okay. So moving on, we have Saint Gemma Galgani. Where's Dottie? Saint Gemma Galgani offers yet another dimension for us. Her relationship with her guardian angel has been described in very profoundly personal terms, even more so than St. Padre Pio does. The angel corrected her. The way she puts it, the angel rebukes her.
Looks at her crossly.
Shows up to rebuke her, not to comfort her, but to kind of like jerk her up and say, what are you doing? So her accounts of her guardian angel are among the most detailed and personal that we have in all of Catholic mysticism. What's striking is it not only that she experienced her angel, but how consistently and concretely this being showed up. And she describes the interaction as, quote, an intimate presence, a direct conversation, okay? And she describes this direct conversation 3 different ways, okay? First of all, she says, it would sometimes be an interior voice, but a distinct one. Have you ever had that little still small voice in you say something and ever wondered where that came from? This might give you cause to think about that the next time and test it. Is it good? Is it something good? Because if it's something good, or it points to a good, you should be paying more attention to it. She said sometimes it's something that she heard in her soul or in her mind. A sentence, a phrase, okay? But clearly, she said, not my own thoughts, because I don't know this. So clearly not my own thoughts. And then the other thing that she says is that sometimes there would be a visible presence who would appear before her with an audible voice, okay? Seeing the angel externally in front of her. And she said, when this happened, the angel appeared to her, and spoke to her as if a human being. Okay? Standing near her, speaking in ordinary language that Gemma understood, sometimes using gestures like we would do to speak with one another. We talk with our hands, using gestures.
Well, she was Italian, so.
Yes, there you go. We got to talk like this, right? So there's that, yes. Thank you for that. It's very true, Wendy. I would imagine that our angels come and speak to us in language we would definitely understand. So she does mention the gestures. That's funny. And she says that this sort of moves beyond sort of an interior experience to something that is more physical in front of her, okay? And then she said sometimes the third way is that there's a mixture of those two. It would begin as sort of an internal kind of movement or a question or a comment that she heard in her mind. For instance, she describes having dreams and awakening and the angel being sitting in her room, okay? So the angel had been speaking to her in her sleep. So three different ways, and I think that what the angel says to her is really interesting too. The way she recorded these, they're always structured, they're always purposeful. There's a rhythm and a harmony to them. They're not random thoughts or random messages, but there is a direct correction and moral discipline. This is the overwhelming theme. Gemma, get your act together. I'm paraphrasing the angel. But giving direction about spiritual or moral conduct, okay? Quote, do you not see that you have offended Jesus? Well, I would probably take that to heart if an angel appeared and said that to me, right? Do you not see that you have offended Jesus? She said this happened when she became distracted in prayer and gave in to discouragement and left prayer. The angel appeared to her and said, do you not see that you have offended Jesus? Okay? So the tone here is important. And she says, he's not harsh. This angel is not harsh, but the angel is firm and direct and obviously cared for her spiritual well-being. The angel, she says, taught her how to pray. Quote, pray with your heart, not only with your lips. Okay, simple enough. Yeah. Like a spiritual director, almost. When she endured some physical suffering from an illness that she had an angelic encounter. And the angel said to her, quote, Jesus permits this for your sanctification. Okay, reframing sort of her suffering into a spiritual context as well. So, obedience. The angel repeatedly told her to submit herself in everything, warning her against spiritual pride. I mean, these are among the most detailed accounts that we have of any human being having a direct encounter with an angel. She records them over her life, and actually there's dozens and dozens of these that she gives all the details. Okay, so I could actually spend a lot of time talking about just her. So, in this case, her guardian angel is a protector, an instructor, and a corrector. All of those things. Yeah. So, not just intervening when, in like, you step in front of the train or whatever. Doesn't flatter her. This angel does not flatter her. If you read these comments from this angel, he's just firm and direct. Or he, she, it has no gender. It is firm and direct. And calls her to humility, calls her to obedience, calls her to good things. All good. Never flattering her. Trust me, read those. She never got a kind word. She never got like a flattering word from this angel.
She never got affirmation.
She never, well, only in the sense that what she needed to do, what she needed to do. Her angel is forming her soul. Forming her soul.
She had this stigmata too, didn't she?
Yes, she did. It's an interesting thing about some of these is that they share that. And then we have Saint Teresa of Avila. Her most famous account is of the angel piercing her heart. What we call the transverberation is one of the most discussed experiences in all of Catholic mysticism. This is actually a famous Bernini sculpture of her in Rome, the angel piercing her heart. And she describes the angel, this angelic encounter she had. The angel has a golden lance and pierces her heart as a form of mystical union, piercing her heart with all of the sorrow of Christ, but binding her to Christ in a very, very physical way. And she is very clear. If you read her account of this, she's not talking about a metaphor. This is a real experience that she had. A direct experience, a direct encounter. So again, a pretty dramatic example, can we say? And I would encourage you, actually, I'm sort of watching my time here. I would encourage you to go and maybe read her account of this. It's not analogy, it's not metaphor. Again, all of these share that in common. They are real encounters. They're not dreams, they're not thoughts, abstract thoughts. They're real encounters that these people have had. And finally, St. John Bosco. His case is most unusual. He was protected repeatedly by a mysterious gray dog, known as Grigio, the gray one, who appeared at very crucial moments and then would disappear. Now, was this an angel? And what might point us to this being an angel, besides just saying, well, you know, dogs can do weird things?
Because they lived such a long life.
He appeared to John Bosco for 30 years, number one, and he never ate, even when offered food. You know any dog that doesn't eat when they're offered food? And this is actually what raised St. John Bosco's index of suspicion about this dog. He didn't behave like a dog. And the eating thing he talks about a lot. You know, offering him raw meat, cooked meat. And the dog refused to eat and appeared over 30 years, same dog. And the tradition has often sort of interpreted that this was an angel. And you'll notice the form is not human. So that kind of expands our understanding, doesn't it? That angels are not limited. They're not limited to the form that they take. They're pure spirits. So again, this is at God's directive. So you would assume then that an angel, being non-material being, pure spirit, could take on any form suitable for their mission. Doesn't the scriptures tell us something related? We're supposed to always be kind to strangers. Why? What does it tell us? Because sometimes we entertain angels unaware. Yeah? That can take any form. So among the most intriguing sort of, I think, stories is about this Grigio dog. Something entirely ordinary, a gray dog, nothing particularly special about him either, as St. John Bosco tells us. But the earliest account he tells us was when he was walking alone one night when he was physically threatened. He was physically threatened by a group, an anti-clerical, there's sort of a movement, he's living in Italy in the 19th century, sort of an anti-clerical movement. He was threatened physically, and he worked among poor boys. You know, he worked among poor children. And so he had some young men, some young boys with him, and at a moment of danger, when he's encountered this very hostile group of men, this gray dog makes his first appearance, okay? The dog approached him silently, he says, calmly, positioned himself directly between Bosco and his attackers. The dog didn't bark. He said the dog didn't bark or behave wildly like a protective dog might. Instead, it stood between Bosco and these men with an authority that St. John Bosco later recorded, an authority that was controlled and apparently divine. Because the men who threatened him went away. They retreated. And the dog remained with Bosco until he was safe, and then the dog vanished. Okay. So Bosco wrote about this. I mean, he actually is writing retrospectively because after he began to have these appearances, this dog began to appear over time, over decades. It's no longer just one single little curious incident. It's something that's repeating itself. It's consistency, multiple locations, 30 years, always in moments of real danger, either for Bosco or for one of the young people that he was in charge of caring for. The dog would arrive exactly, apparently, when he was needed to, disappear without a trace, no footprints, no owner, no explanation, and no eating. I find that very curious. So, witnesses, including other priests and the boys in that community, also reported seeing him. They noted things like this. The dog is too large to be a dog. Too powerful and yet acclimated to humans to be a stray. It never ate when offered food, behaves not like a domestic animal, one other priest said. One priest noted, it seems to appear and disappear in ways that are impossible. So this is very well documented. And so not acting according to a dog, but again, as a protector, escorting. Bosco writes this, on multiple occasions, he says, Grigio would appear at my side and walk with me through the streets. Okay, he's in Turin, Italy, by the way. Would walk with me through the streets, and he would always stay with me until I reached where I was going, and then he vanished. So he has this direct kind of encounter. What do we think about that? A supernatural protector, an angelic manifestation, but in the form of an animal. I think even Bosco was a little bit unsure. He also tried to seek guidance about this. Is this really possible, he said, that an angel could become a dog? And this is where I think the case becomes especially rich for us, is that even those descriptions that are recorded biblically, you know, the major angelic encounters that are recorded in sacred scripture are human-like. Are there, are there radiant beings? Are there luminous beings? But not so much like this. Grigio sort of breaks this expectation, doesn't it? So what do we think about that? How do y'all feel about that? Deacon?
I kind of think that, you know, when you really think about it, that may be appropriate for his guardian angel. If he's walking in the worst parts of town in front of men, young guys who probably fought all their life, they're not going to be intimidated by another man, another
Right.
person. You know,
Right.
at that point it becomes a sense of pride. I'm not going to let you scare me away.
Yeah.
And when you got an unknown, an animal that's, as you said, didn't bark anything, but is probably there with some special look about him that you say, this dog is different.
Right, right.
Maybe he takes that appearance as guardian angel.
Well, lacking any other explanation,
Yeah.
you know, I think that it's sort of a reasonable thing to conclude. And the behavior of the dog. I mean, the dog never barked and the dog never ate, and the dog could simply command a space by being present in that space. Some people have tried to suggest, reading this story, that it was just a real stray dog that was attached to Bosco, but that does not explain the 30 years of his life. It doesn't explain the disappearances and reappearances, the fact that he didn't eat, long-term consistency without this dog ever aging or changing. I mean, the dog never barking, never snarling, never growling, no one ever heard it make a sound. So, it is a story that grew over time, of course, in the Salesian tradition of St. John Bosco. But there are many witnesses. There's very early documentation, including St. John Bosco's own account, consistency across the account, and I think making it pure legend would be difficult to sustain. So I think this is an interesting one, and I think it invites us to sort of expand our understanding too, right, about what an angel might be. But it's not my cat. So to sort of bring all those together, you can see that angels don't really, our encounters with angels don't really sort of have a uniform behavior to them. They communicate, they guide, they protect, they transform, and they instruct. So all of these things, and even suffer alongside us in some cases. So angelic encounters, yeah, that'd be cool to have one, but that's not the point. The point is their mission for us. They appear in the form to us when necessary, for whatever God is trying to accomplish. If not, sometimes, as we saw with St. Joan of Arc and St. Francis of Assisi, it's not just about us. It's not just about me and my personal journey of faith. It's about something that is much larger. Globally, in the case of St. Joan of Arc, certainly in terms of the entire faith, the witness that St. Francis is physically to us with the stigmata. So where does that leave us, I think? The saints has kind of given us some glimpses of this glimpse of this world that is separate from ours. It's not ours, beings. But it makes them seem like not so much like distant figures to us, right? Y'all kind of get that? Not so much like distant figures. And they remind us that reality is more than we can measure. I mean, how many of you sitting here this morning even had a twinge of a thought, be honest, even had a twinge of a thought, that can't be real? Anybody? Thank you for your honesty. I'm not going to name you, but thank you for your honesty. Yeah, we hear these stories, and even as good Catholics, we think, we have a faith that is supernatural. We heard this morning, we have a faith that raises people from the dead. And we hear some of these stories of these saints, and it is not uncommon for people to question that. So I invite you to sort of step into that in a new way, maybe, even these last couple of weeks of Lent, to step into that in a new way, to see them, even in your mind's eye, as being physically really present with you. Reality is more than we can measure. The veil is there. I'm not suggesting that you're going to walk out of here and get in your car and your guardian angel is going to be sitting in the front seat or the back seat, as I feel like mine sometimes does, but telling me how to drive. But that to know that they are a reality. They are a reality. And in the lives of the saints, and we think about that veil being there between this life and the next, in the lives of the saints, you know, one thing we didn't talk about, and just remember this, is that when your life is illuminated enough by the light of Christ, that veil becomes very thin. Because the light that illuminates your life thins that veil. So that I think that explains why some of these saints had such direct encounters, is because they have allowed that illumination to take place in themselves. The veil becomes thin enough for the light to pass through. Does that make sense? It becomes thin enough for the light to pass through. And if that's true, then the question is not simply whether angels appear to saints, but whether or not we are attentive enough to find that in our own lives. The presence of the unseen in our own lives. Okay, I'm going to stop that right there. Any questions, comments?